with primacy rules.
Thank you, Mark, and morning, everyone. So we go to the next slide. So what I'll do today is I'm going to cover off the background to the cost-benefit analysis that's been undertaken as part of primacy rules, and just a bit of an overview of the primacy rules that were considered, the results, and then I'll just cover off what we're going to do next with the results of the analysis. So for those that that aren't aware, as part of the consideration of primacy rules, that when we were comparing the store services procured by ESO and the A&M schemes that are operated by the DNOs, this unveiled a whole heap of complexity. And the conclusion that we landed at as part of the working group was that initial analysis about the store was, or if you like, the use case was sensitive to store product design changes that are currently being undertaken. So it was decided that we should undertake an independent piece of analysis to say what was the most appropriate way forward. And so the ENA commissioned DNV to undertake 5 individual tasks, and you can all read, I won't go through them all, but if you like, the outcomes I will share with you today. So if DNV set about undertaking these 5 work packages, and then it's transpired into a report. If you go to the next slide. So what we landed on was a series of potential rules that could be applied to this use case of store versus A&M. And again, you can all read, I won't go through them. So there were 7 rules initially, and then there were another couple that DNV added into the mix. And the idea being is that they would compare and contrast these rules against the scenario of store and A&M being conflicted. And of course, the idea being is that in some instances, the DNO would have primacy, and in other instances, ESO would have primacy. So if you go to the next slide, Alex. So it was important to consider, well, what if we did nothing? So in the event that there was a clash between store versus A&M, could we just rely on just the market solving the problem? And so DNV undertook a piece of analysis with data from the DNOs and from ESO to say what would happen if we did nothing. And funnily enough, as it stands today, I don't think it would become as a bit of a shock that at the moment there doesn't seem to be a compelling need to implement a primacy rule, because at the moment the ESO has access to a number of differing services that could ostensibly mitigate the effect of this clash between store versus A&M. But nevertheless, of course, that won't last indefinitely, because our expectation as ESO, and I think the DNOs would agree, is that as we start both procuring services, they're inevitably going to start being conflicted. And of course, that might happen probably over the next few months or into 2024. So if you go to next slide. So having considered all of these rules, the conclusion was that firstly, it doesn't necessarily make economic sense to implement primacy rules today, but in the medium to longer term, it will become necessary. But DNV recommended that we implement Rule 3B, and Rule 3B was just a more dynamic version of providers of services being removed from the stack. And from an ENA DNO's point of view, the recommendation is that we will look to implement Rule 3 as part of the work that the primacy working group is going to be undertaking. And what I probably also should say at the moment is what's happening running in parallel with with all of this is that the working group are taking a review of where we've got to with all of these primacy rules. And what we're looking at now is accelerating the number of use cases that can be brought to market by looking at some, what I call some enabling processes and data. So the idea being is that this particular use case will now be included with DNV's recommendation as part of the next increment. But more information will come from that over the summer. So next slide. So in terms of next steps, what's happening at the moment is the DNOs have been reviewing the final report, commenting, and then the intention is that what will happen is there'll be a bit of bookending to the report with a bit of an introduction as to why the report was undertaken, and the next steps will then be articulated at the back of it. And that analysis should be available fairly shortly. We're just working through some final changes with DNV based on some comments, and I'm hoping that will be out relatively quickly. And I think that's the last slide, if memory serves. Yes, so you feel free to ask Luke and I some questions.
Thank you, Stuart. A good insight and update on where we are at the moment with primacy and some signposts for people to look out for. So, yep, we've got 5 minutes just now for any questions, so we can open it up to the wider group. If you would like to drop a message in the chat, or if you would like to come off mute at this point and ask a question, please feel free.
I think Lisa had a question about the slides being bigger. I'm assuming, is that all right now, Lisa? Could you see them?
We'll take silence as golden on this one, guys. So thank you very much for your update. Sorry, Stuart, on you go.
Yeah, all I was going to say is I'm assuming that Helen, the slides will be made available so Lisa can look at them.
Yes, as we speak, I'm dropping a link in the chat box, so you'll be able to have your own copy alongside and zoom in, if that helps.
Perfect. No, thank you, Helen. No, thank you, Stuart and Luke. Appreciate the work as always. And we'll continue to move through the agenda. So we're going to hand over to Tariq to talk us through some of the work that's been ongoing in terms of settlement processes and an outlook for the work for the rest of the year. So Tariq, over to you.
Morning all. So my name is Tariq Hakim, so from the ESO, and I'm a co-lead on the settlements work stream. So I'm just going to run through, what we're hoping to achieve on this work stream. It's a bit of an introduction, milestones, the work we've done so far, and then the next steps. If you can move to the next slide, please. So initially, what's the purpose of the work that we're trying to do? So on the main outcome there, so the main purpose is to standardize the settlement processes across DNOs, to make sure that it's a common settlement process, with the aim being that any external parties, flexibility providers, if they interact with one DNO, so they have similar interactions with other DNOs and similar timescales for processes and activities to happen, so it's easy for them to supply services to one DNO and also supply services to other DNOs to make sure, as I said, the ease of use. So the diagram there just focuses on an individual DNO, just to give a high level overview of what the actual process is. The settlement process is, it focuses on SSE, and you can see that initially we have the operational monitor. That's when services are actually used, and then following that, the provider's got a period of time to submit the baseline and operational metering. Then there's 15 days to prepare for the application process. The provider submits the invoice, and then there's 30 days to actually make payment. So across the DNOs, it's a similar process, but there's differences in timescales and individual detail across those activities. If you can move to the next slide. So this is a high level overview of what the plan is for this year. By April next year, April 2024, we hope to be aligned, and to reach that alignment in June. So we completed the gap analysis. So what's the difference between individual DNOs? An apology, I just realised I didn't have my camera on. So what's the difference between individual DNOs? Then in July, we're going to hold a focus group to find out, what the priorities from stakeholders and which ones they want to take forward. And then once we've defined the priorities and defined the alignment, we're going to move into the implementation phase, as I said, for a target date for April 24, when hopefully alignment will be achieved across so all the DNOs. We can move to the next slide. So in terms, so the starting point of everything is, where are we now and what are the differences between the individual DNOs? So this is a snapshot of a spreadsheet, and the full spreadsheet are available in Huddle. But this is a snapshot of a spreadsheet and where we are in terms of alignment across the different activities. And you can see that there's a red, amber, green status for each activity. So green means that there's 4 or more also DNOs that are aligned. Amber means there's between 2 and 4 DNOs with similar alignment, and red means that so less than 2 DNOs are aligned. So you can see there that there's a number of activities. There's a couple in green, mostly in amber, and quite a few in red as well. So the ones in red, for example, we have the third row down, what is metering accuracy. Then we've got process, when is data obtained, days after dispatch, or how many days after dispatch. So there's quite a few differences across the DNO. So this is our starting point, and our activities that we're going to sort of focus on in terms of alignment. And we're going to take this to the focus groups for further discussion. You can move to the next slide, please. So the focus group is on the 4th of July, and you can see from that slide that the purpose of the focus group is to get stakeholder feedback and priorities for discussion on priorities and the ranking of sort of priorities. So the goals of the session are explore the elements of alignment, that settlement, that stakeholders value the most, discuss some detail around metering data, the granularity of metering data, possibly specifications around metering data as well, and then incentives around performance as well. So the next steps is focus groups, and then move on from there. So that was a whistle-stop tour of the settlements work group. Does anybody have any questions?
Thank you, Tarek. That was great to get that update. I'm going to do the same, just open it up to the floor, and if anyone would like to, if they'd be more comfortable raising a question in the chat function, please do so. As ever, chair's prerogative. If we don't get anything, we'll take silence as golden and continue working through the agenda. I'm just going to signpost as well from the beginning of the session that we had put the Open Networks contact email address on the first slide. So again, if you have any feedback or any questions, then you can always follow up directly with the Open Networks team.
Thanks, Mark. We are running just slightly ahead on the agenda, and are just trying to get in touch with Deepak, our next presenter, to get him on the line. But yeah, we might just be a couple minutes.
No problem.
So maybe if we can give it a bit more time on the Q&A on the previous presentation, if there are any comments, questions around that.
Yep, sure. I'll open up to the 2 sessions. So I note that Stuart's still on the line with Luke. So, and we've got Tarek on this. So again, we'll keep it open for any questions on the first 2 presentations. And Deepak is here, Helen. So
Amazing.
superb. So if you wouldn't mind, Deepak, we'll hand over to yourself for the next session on operational data sharing. You're on mute, Deepak, just in case.
Morning, everybody. Thank you very much for that. Hi, I'm Deepak Lala. I'm one of the two co-leads on this working group. Steve Backhouse from UKPN, unfortunately, is not here with me today. He was unavailable. This does mean that I've taken over the co-lead role recently, and Steve's got more understanding of the journey till date. So it might be that I might have to take away some questions, but without much further ado, let me launch into the slides. So on this slide, I'm looking to cover the scope for the technical working group, the journey over the last couple of years, and how we're looking forward for this year. 2021-22, again, I won't read out all the text there. The objective of the group is to twofold: is to identify firstly the data being shared to improve operational and planning processes between licensed entities. So that's DNO DSO / ESO. It's bidirectional in nature, so we're talking about data flows between and to the ESO. The second aspect of the technical working group is to consider the data for the non-licensed entities, so market, customers, etc. In terms of what we are trying to deliver for this year, we are looking at harmonizing the data currently being shared between the DNO and ESO. So we're building upon the work that was done previously. There's a list of data items that are currently being shared. The group has taken an action to review and harmonize the means, the methods through which this data is being submitted to the ESO. We are also looking as a group to consider new data assets that can be shared, both for ourselves and for the market participants. We've got a proposal as a group to engage an external consultant to carry out a focused study of how, what data sets would be beneficial. So I would very much welcome your thoughts and suggestions on how we can go about that. And finally, we'll look to also carry out cost-benefit analysis to justify any additional data sets that we identify for sharing. And last but not least, we'll be looking to initiate code changes for harmonized data exchange, both in terms of data assets and the sharing protocol. Can I have the next slide, please? So what has been achieved till date? We have an overall view of all current data sharing, and that has been published on the ENA portal. We also have had the coordination of the various industry working groups dealing with data. We've got a agreed set of data to be published by both ESO and DNOs to the market and customers. At present, there is a realization understanding that the mechanisms by which this is happening at the moment is not optimal, but we'll be looking to consider that as well. In addition, we'll be looking to think about the roadmap for future data sharing proposals. Can I have a next slide, please? This slide shows an example of the data currently being published by DNOs. It sort of outlines at a glance what data sets might be available. I'd strongly suggest, urge you to look at the ENA portal for a comprehensive list. This data is currently being published on one of the DNO's data portals, and that is the approach currently being taken across the licensed entities. We'll be looking to get some feedback to shape how this could change and improve. So again, please do share your feedback in the Q&A or through the email. Can I have a next slide, please? This slide shows a list of data that's currently being shared. This is the rack status. As you can see, there are some data assets that are currently identified as red. These are the ones that have been identified as being challenging to implement for various reasons. So there's work ongoing at present to consider how we can move this to green at a rapid pace. But effectively, again, this RAG report has been published previously and is available on the ENA portal as well. You can have the next slide, please. Engagement. This slide gives sort of at a glance view of how we are working as a group. So we're looking to work with the other industry groups to align processes and data. We're seeking feedback from various sources. As an example, so I'm here today seeking feedback from yourselves and various other feedback events. We've proposed an industry workshop, again, and an external consultant-led exercise to identify the data requirements for market participants and the other non-licensed entities. And there have been some previous actions that have been undertaken as well. Again, it outlines that we've done a survey previously, as well as an ENA survey in 2022 Q4. Can I have a next slide, please? And finally, I'd really appreciate, as I've said twice already on this, it'd be great to get some feedback on our current direction, whether you find data that is currently being published by the various network entities useful, whether you would like to see any changes. Does it allow you to retrieve, manipulate, and process the data that would suit your requirements? And if there are any suggestions around how data could be standardized, we would really welcome that. And again, there's the email link that we mentioned earlier. Hopefully, everyone can access that link after this session.
Thank you, Deepak. Again, we'll just open this up to Q&A. So there's a couple of questions coming in to the chat, Deepak, if you would like to draw your attention to them, please.
Yeah, so I'll just pick off please carry on, Mark.
No, I was just going to say we've got the two messages in the chat, but I've also noted that Kenny's very diligently put his hand up. So if you don't mind, can we go to the Kenny in the first instance, and then we'll go to the comments in the chat. So Kenny, across to yourself, please.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Yeah, a question for Deepak. I'm a co-founder in Connected Response who smart charge electric storage heating and hot water systems. So we have about 10,000 or 20,000 loads under control, storage heating and hot water loads. A lot of it's in Glasgow, but some of it is in other parts of the country. And it would be good to try and understand how you anticipate providers like us who are providing a service to landlords and tenants that are main business, but how we would share that load, because that's 20,000 loads that can be flexibly charged. So how do you see that being shared by the market back to ESO and DSOs?
So there's a number of different facets to the answer. In terms of ESO's own focus, there are a number of activities that are currently ongoing to increase visibility of such assets. In terms of the technical working group, to carry out a external survey and a workshop for all such market participants. We'll be looking to utilize ENA's database and get steer from other working groups on how they've undertaken similar surveys to ensure that we get a very good cross-section of all businesses and all stakeholders externally. And we'll be looking to engage them and looking to get a better understanding of the requirements of the use cases. And potentially, once we've got that base, we've got that data, we'll be looking to carry out a cost-benefit analysis to ensure that we are carrying out the most cost-effective option that can help meet the scored list of the stakeholder priorities. I can go into a lot more detail, obviously, but there's quite a lot of work ongoing as well within ESO on increasing visibility of such assets. And hopefully, sort of in the time to come, near future, we should have a lot more engagement with the external participants.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Deepak. And just to complement that, Kenny, I guess just to signpost, obviously each of the respective DNO businesses run their flexibility tenders, which if you register on their websites and their portals, then it's very much keeping an eye on those, and that's an opportunity to elevate essentially you're offering, and potentially see yourself as an aggregator or offerer of those services on behalf of your customers. So again, with this signpost, some of the market activity, you might want to keep your eye on that. So thank you, Kenny. Thank you, Deepak. I'm going to pass across to Lisa, if I can, please. I note you've got your hand up as well.
Hi, thank you. So I don't have the list of the data, but I'm more interested in things like, are you helping get data to grid, like the increase in solar? Because when you looked at Grid's winter forecast and review of last winter, they seemed relatively blind to the developments going on within the DNOs. So things like your embedded capacity register, shouldn't we be taking that down to significantly smaller levels of embedded generation and things like that to try and better inform the whole process?
Thanks, Lisa. I'm not. I don't have the numbers and the stats to hand of the issue that you just mentioned there. I'll take that away and I'll look at that. Could I get your email address perhaps or means to get in touch with you if you drop a line to the email address out there?
So I guess just to respect kind of data privacy and everything, Lisa, you've got the Open Networks email address, I'm assuming. So if you wouldn't mind, if you can drop a note, and I'll make sure that Helen or one of the team connect you with Deepak to follow up. So
sure.
Just
thank you.
No problem at all. Thank you. So we've got a couple of questions in the chat. One. So if we look at, so again, we had a note from Lisa. There are respective portals on each of the DNO and websites for any of the kind of the data sharing and open data that Deepak has been referring to. I don't believe we've got a central collated list of locations. I'll ask Helen if you could take that away just as something to double check, please.
Yes, I'll quickly answer, Mark. That's correct. There's no central list, but I know there's an ESO data portal, and if DNOs have their own ones as well. Deepak, maybe if you have it hand, you can drop the ESO one in the chat. Thank you.
I'll do that once I finish. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you, Deepak. Just moving on to a question from Sam. So are there any issues sharing data between different utilities, electricity, gas, water? Are people seeking to be paid for data if it is in a different utility, etc.? So Deepak.
Thank you, Sam. I think there are obviously several considerations here when we talk about data sharing, especially about residential level data, GDPR, data laws, etc. So in terms of issues, certainly there are many. So the number of things need to be taken into account. In terms of your second part of the question, are people seeking to be paid for data? I'm not really sure whether the question, if there are sort of providers who are seeking such data sources and paying for them, there potentially might be, but it's not something that I'm aware of.
We seem to have temporarily lost. Oh, sorry, Deepak, we lost you for a few seconds there.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Yep, and I think Sam's also just raised his hand, so you might want to come in with a supplementary question there.
Yeah, sorry. Thanks very much, Deepak. I'm just sort of really clarifying my question a bit, which is I'm just wondering if are there any issues? Have there been any issues, or is it something that are people looking to share data on a sort of cross-utility basis? Are you finding that various people's systems aren't up to sharing data? I mean, I notice that a lot of the conversation you've focused on has just been sharing data within the electricity industry, and I'm wondering what happens if somebody in, I don't know, the water industry decides they need data, or you decide that you might need data from them. Is there a sort of, have you looked wider than just sharing electricity data inside the electricity industry? Sort of, I mean, if you're thinking whole systems thinking and all that kind of stuff, you'd expect to, bring some of these things together.
Yeah. So as part of again, there's two aspects to the question. The scope of the technical working group in itself is to consider operate data that will help improve operational and planning processes for the distributed entities and ESO. So in terms and market participants. So in terms of what the scope is for the group, absolutely that's focused on, like you said, on the networks and the industry itself. In terms of the whole of system thinking, I think that's a very valid point. So thank you for that. It's something that we seek feedback on, like I said, and I'll take that away as a point of discussion for the technical working group to think about, and we'll have a discussion on that. Thank you.
I think as much, just to supplement that, is that looking at the whole system license requirements, Sam, that have been cascaded across the different licenses, is, in the first instance, is just facilitating those cross-sector conversations to understand you're crossing regulatory environments here, you're crossing regional variances, but also different delivery requirements and different expectations. So what I think in the first instance is always just facilitating those cross-sector conversations and the kind of whole system components of that across transmission, distribution, across different licenses is starting to kind of open up some of those conversations, and that will eventually, as part of that may lead to data exchange or data requirements naturally from those conversations. I guess I'm going to try and bring this particular Q&A to a close. So Lisa, I know you've got your hand back up, and then what we'll do is we'll move on in the agenda. So Lisa, back to yourself, please.
Are you thinking of putting all the data into one place? It's not very helpful that the DNO data is spread across all the DNOs. Why don't we have like a separate part of the grid data portal where the DNOs upload all their stuff?
Sorry, Deepak, on you go. I'll let you tackle that one.
No, please. If Mark, if you want to take the first shot, that's fine.
I was just going to say, well, it's certainly, we'll take that view away, Lisa, and feed it back into the technical working group to see what comes out. But you've got different licenses serving different needs and different data responsibilities. So ultimately, the accountability and responsibility for the data sits with different entities. So it's something that can be fed into the consideration. But I think at the moment, surfacing that data is important, making it available. And then the second instance is then long term, where does it sit, is something that we would naturally consider on a rolling basis. But anything you would like to add, Deepak?
No, I think you hit it. You got exactly what I wanted to say. You got there. It's a very valid point, Lisa. Thank you for that again. Again, as we said, we as a group, we're looking at baselining and improving the data that we can share using the existing data sharing mechanisms. This would ensure that we can identify the data that is needed, that could help, is effective, and is beneficial for all the licensed and non-licensed entities. Once we've done that, we'll also be looking at the protocols on how we share the data currently. So there's sort of a journey there. At some point, eventually, obviously, it will be very useful to have this all in one place. But there are a number of other, like Mark said, other things to think about before we get there.
Yeah, I mean, I would just flag that as an industry, we've had the data task force. We've all been told all data should be open, transparent, and everything else. The DNO seems to move remarkably slowly on providing stuff in a format that everybody can easily access and use without hunting around on hundreds of websites.
Thanks, Lisa. I'll feed that. I'll take that point and I'll feed that back to the group.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Deepak, for your giving us the insight into what's been going on in the operational data sharing area. And thank you all for your questions and contributions over the course of the Q&A. So we've got a 10-minute break now. What I would suggest is that's currently...
Sorry, Mark. I was actually going to suggest, as we're running a bit ahead of schedule and we do have Helen on the call for the next presentation, we could move swiftly into it if you're happy with that.
Yes, I think so. I think if we can get one more session and then we'll see how everyone's feeling after that. So yep, if you're happy to move on to the next session, please. I'll hand over across to Helen to give us an insight into the procurement processes. Helen, over to yourself.
Hi, thanks. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Yep.
Yes, good. Great. Apologies, I can't put my camera on. I'm at a different workstation today, so apologies. So yeah, I'm going to give a bit of an update on what we're doing with our procurement processes, technical working group. So if we go to the first slide, this just gives a bit of a summary of the objectives of the work that we're doing this year. So last year we kind of undertook some gap analysis of what every DNO and the ESO is doing in terms of pre-qualifying providers into our flexibility market. So what questions are we asking? What questions are we asking on a commercial basis, and what questions are we asking on a technical basis? And we did that sort of gap analysis to see what the different approaches were in terms of process, and what the different approaches were in you know, the detail of what we're actually asking. And the recommendation that came out from the work in 2022 was that we look to standardize that approach, and we produce standard templates, a standard data layer of the commercial criteria and the technical criteria that we would ask in order to pre-qualify flexibility providers into the flex market. That was recommended that it's done with the engagement of stakeholders, with the engagement of the market, so providers of flexibility and also other market stakeholders, so platform providers or system providers as well, and get their views on that standardization, and that once we've collated that feedback, we agree what those standard templates are, and we also set out a clear implementation plan of when DNOs will adopt those standard templates for pre-qualification as well. So that's sort of the work that we've been doing throughout 2023. And we have done quite a bit of shaping of what those standard templates look like, which I think is the next slide, if we just move on. Oh, okay. So yeah, we've done the collation of that. We've sort of drafted what we think those standard templates look like, and what criteria and how we can standardize that criteria. We've done pretty much completed it with the technical criteria. So, you know, asking about the details of assets themselves, and their operating parameters and their technology, you know, sort of grouping criteria. That is pretty much complete. Some of the commercial aspects are still ongoing. There's a few sort of differences that every organisation does internally because of their, you know, policy within the organisation, legal and procurement processes within the organisation. So some of those aspects are still ongoing, but we're making good progress with that. And I'll show you sort of an overview of what we're doing in a moment as well. While we're looking at this criteria, we are really focusing on what the future needs are. So there's you know, real sort of recognition that we are evolving, and we're where we're going to be in the future in terms of how we contract flexibility is probably going to be, or you know, very likely going to be different to how we do it now. So at the moment, DNOs tend to procure on a bilateral basis, so one-to-one contract direct with the provider, and it will be done post-tender. So they'll launch a tender and award a contract after the tender is complete. But as we start to evolve towards closer to real time, DNOs will likely adopt a more framework style approach to contracts. So you'll put a framework, like an overarching contract, in at the point of pre-qualification. So then you can call off tenders, you know, within any time frame closer to real time, without having to contract for every single tender. So this overarching framework sits in place. So some of the way that we shape the criteria really is looking to the future, you know, the way that we would likely be contracting for flexibility as we move forward. And there are some differences in the approach that we've taken, and that's where some of the differences will come out as I explain in a moment, as to whether DNOs see themselves moving towards a framework and the timings around that. So if we move to the next slide. So this is just a sort of a summary of how we've standardized the technical criteria. So we're obviously looking at the parameters of the asset. Is it connected? What's its energization status? Where is it? What's its MPAN number? What type of asset is it? Is it domestic? Is it I&C? What type of flexibility can it offer? Is it demand? Is it generation? Is it storage? What is the technology of the asset, and what is the sort of the fuel source of the asset as well? So technology groupings for the asset. What are its operating parameters? So what's its capacity? What direction can it operate in? Can it do turn up or turn down? How long can it run for? All those kind of things, and metering granularity as well. So what level of metering can be provided for that asset, whether it's a single asset or a grouped aggregated unit of assets. What metering granularity can be provided for those. Out of scope, we've taken anything that is specific to the tender, so things that would generally be done at the point of bid. So anything around pricing isn't within there. Anything around the actual windows that assets can provide delivery isn't in there. We've also taken out methodologies for dispatch as well. So the dispatch capabilities, because all of those things would either be covered in the contract, so they would be specified within the contract, or they would be included at the point of bid, so at the point of tender. A couple of sort of considerations on there. So we have been thinking carefully to make sure that the data that we're collecting from particularly domestic assets is GDPR compliant, and that we've sort of found a way forward on that to make sure we're not collecting anything that we shouldn't be, or collecting data that we're not going, more importantly data we're not going to use, and that everything we collect is justifiable. In terms of the technology groupings, we've tried to do that in line with our existing sort of reporting needs and how we report back through to the regulator, and the technology groupings that already exist around that sort of those regulatory reporting requirements. And yeah, we're also looking at sort of assets capabilities in terms of direction, and whether it's potentially could provide reactive services as well as active services. So that's sort of where we are with the technical. And then if we move on to the commercial. Yeah, obviously we're collecting information about the company, so address, company registration number, contact, etc. We will be collecting settlement information, so VAT registration, especially if we're those DNOs that move towards a framework contract, so contracting up front and maybe procuring closer to real time. You need all of that information up front rather than post contract. We'd be looking for acceptance of the standard terms and conditions, either physical acceptance in the case of a framework, or indication that you're happy to accept the terms and conditions if it's still on a bilateral basis, and there's also compliance questions so that we can meet any UCR requirements as well. And then questions around due diligence. What's your relationship to the asset? Have you got any registrations with Achilles, FlexiSure, etc.? And have you got appropriate insurance? Those sort of due diligence things. Out of scope, we have got anything that's really really DNO specific, and as I mentioned earlier, different DNOs do have different policies and things that they have to do for their own internal policy. So some examples of that are around cyber security and data protection. Specific questions and clauses have to be included for their own internal compliance. So they're sort of sit outside of this. But what we think is that what should happen over time as DNOs move towards a framework approach is that those things start to be included in the contract, and where the contract's signed up front, those things can start to be covered in the framework contract. Again, we've also taken out anything around delivery criteria and dispatch methodologies. As I said before, they would be covered in the contract or part of the bid criteria. So there's still work ongoing, as I mentioned. Most of it is around our different ways of demonstrating UCR compliance, so the utility contract regulations, and the way that we ask questions and the types of questions that we ask to demonstrate UCR compliance. And agreeing a standard way of asking those obviously takes a lot of coordination internally within each organisation as well. But we're moving that forward, and hopefully in the next couple of weeks we hope to have something draft around that we can start to engage with stakeholders on. So I think if we just move to the next slide. So just to sort of view on where we are in terms of implementation, or where we think we are. We're hoping to finalise these templates, these standard criteria templates, after some stakeholder engagement that will take place with the focus groups in July. Through August, September, we'll take that feedback, finalise these templates. And most DNOs are actually looking to implement this straight away from October, and kind of do that in parallel with the point in time where they expect to adopt the framework style contract as well. But some DNOs do have dependencies on systems that they're using to support with the sort of procurement activities, and there will be, the development required to some of those systems where there is changes or additions to how we are, those criteria that we're asking. But all DNOs have committed to begin implementation from October this year, and to have completed it by March 24. And that sort of individual assessment is still ongoing within DNOs internally as to exactly when and how that will be delivered. I think that's the last slide from me.
No, thank you, Helen. That was a good update, showing that there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes. So I guess what we'll do, we've got one question that I note in the chat box. I guess I'll just open it up to the forum more broadly if anyone has any questions. As always, if you can raise your hand and I'll direct to yourself. If not, then I'll go straight to Andrew's question in the chat box.
Sorry, I'm just waiting. It won't open up for me.
No problem. So Helen, the question from Andrew.
It's literally just
sorry.
popped on. Yeah,
There you
sorry.
go.
So reactive power from small assets. I might struggle to answer that one if I'm completely honest. Within NGED, so I work for NGED, and we haven't sought to procure reactive power as yet. There are a couple of DNOs, particularly SPEN, I think, that's going out for potential reactive power services in their procurement. I don't know if we've got anyone from SPEN on the call that's got a view on that, but yeah, it's not something I could really give much of a detailed answer on if I'm completely honest. But I will certainly go away and find out if we don't have anyone from SPEN that can answer that.
Yes, you've got the benefit, Helen, that the chair's from SPIN, so you've got the we've got so thank you, Andrew. I think the note is we are looking at reactive power services, but I'm not sure about if there's any asset or size considerations. So what I would recommend, if the Helens, please, as a pair, if you can take note of that comment, and for the next technical working group, if you can bring that up as a point and bring some feedback to Andrew directly. So that's pretty much just to note a comment from Lisa there, not a question but a comment. So we've got that noted. Thank you. Any other questions, thoughts? Okay, I think we'll move on through the agenda. So Helen, would you suggest that we take a quick comfort break just now, or would you suggest that we try and cover off the recent and upcoming events, and we might actually be able to give people some time back?
Yes, that was going to be my suggestion.
Yeah.
I think if we move straight into it. So just to close us off on the presentations, on recent events, we had our last Open Networks Challenge group at the start of May, and minutes for that are available on our website in the resource library. And coming up, ENA will be co-hosting with Energy UK and Ofgem this year's Equity, Diversity and Inclusion Conference. This is going to be a hybrid event, so it's held in London, but you can also register just to join online if you can't travel in. Should be a great event. And we will be holding 2 days of focus groups for open networks more specifically. This might be of interest to a lot of you as an opportunity to really deep dive into the more technical side of our work and give input on a more detailed level. So we'll share all these details with you on the chat in just a second. And they are also linked to the slide deck that I shared on the chat earlier. And finally, this year's Energy Innovation Summit will be a Halloween summit, so 31st of October. Hope to see you in Liverpool, and a link there to register as well.
Perfect. Thank you, Helen. So to open back up, we've had a number of different presentations, everything from primacy through to operational data sharing through to some discussion around procurement and settlement. So this point of the agenda is really an open discussion, Q&A, reflections that you may have. I guess my reflections as chair from both steering group and other parts is just the huge amount of work that's going on behind the scenes with open networks to shift focus into delivering outputs in the year and to continue to move forward with some of these cross-industry and cross-entity initiatives, which will help move the industry forward. So for me, it's been very thankful for all of the speakers today to take time to update the Insight Forum on their work and for fielding some of the questions from the audience. We have noted a couple of things to follow up on. So if we haven't been able to directly answer your question today, we have noted that and we will take that away and seek to get back in touch. So just for this session, I will open up to any discussions, Q&As and reflections. Sam, across to yourself.
Hi, I was looking at the list of the things going on, and I just wondered if there was anything specific on data sharing. The one of the drop down menu I just looked at, and I went off in the focus groups. It was much more. It was all geared towards flexibility, which is fantastic. But just is there anything sort of that would reference my sort of question area, or is something coming up on that?
Helen, can I steer towards yourself, please, to see what's in the long-term agenda?
Yes, sorry, Sam. Do you mind just slightly repeating what your question was on, and then I'll...
Yeah, sure. No, I'm just sort of in the space at the moment where I'm looking really closely at how different utilities might end up sharing data between each other, sort of from a sort of whole systems perspective. And I just wondered where, I mean, because the brilliant thing about the ENA is that you've got the gas side and the electricity side. So it's just a really useful sort of place to have these sort of conversations. And I think there is in the last meeting we had, I think there's another whole sort of task force around this area, but I can't quite remember what the slide deck looked like from last time. But so I know you're doing it basically. It's just sort of
Yes, thank you. That's helpful. Yes, so what we have within the ENA is something called the Whole System Strategy Group, and that group has properly convened just at the start of this year, and they're in the process of setting out the ENA's strategy on whole systems more generally. So the only project we have ongoing in that area at the moment is on local area energy planning, where we're putting together a sort of guide that all the networks are contributing to on where a local authority is planning a local plan for decarbonising, etc., on how they can get in touch with all the networks and all the relevant pieces to have that kind of all in one place in one helpful guide. So that should be coming out later in the summer or early autumn. But aside from that, that strategy group is having wider discussions around what else we can do, and it's very much a key area that we're going to be looking at, I think later this year and going into next year as well. So yeah, stay tuned for that. There's an ENA-wide newsletter I would recommend signing up to. As more updates come out on whole systems, it would be in there as well.
Is there a chance I can get more closely involved with that particular group? Or
as they're only just setting out the strategy, there isn't stakeholder engagement going on there yet. But yes, we will be doing stakeholder engagement around that local planning, more specifically with all the local authorities and people like that. But we might also be holding an event for wider stakeholders when we launch the guide. So if that goes ahead, there'll be a wider invite as well.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Helen. Yes, just to open back up if there's any, just in case, Sam, you've still got your hand up. Is this a follow-up, or would you like just?
No, I was struggling to lower it, so I just managed to bring the thing up.
No problem at all. Helen's just dropped the Open Networks contact email address into the chat, so if anyone would like to follow up on a one-to-one. Just a note from Helen that much more stakeholder engagement for most groups. There is virtually none, so just something that I'll get the ENA colleagues to note and to take away. So thanks, Helen, and thanks for joining today. So I don't have any AOB as chair that's noted, so I guess I can open it up to the floor. Helen, I don't think you have any other business noted.
No, thanks, Mark, not at this time.
Just one thing to add from me, Mark. Just I'd really like to encourage everyone here. There's a particular interest in these technical working groups to register for the focus group events we have on the 4th and 5th. We're very keen to get your input on these sessions, and we hope to see many of you in the next few weeks. Thanks.
No, thank you, Reece, and it's a good reminder for these groups. So I guess you've had the bit, yes, good note, Kenny, you've had the benefit of a chair from the west coast of Scotland that speaks at 110 miles an hour. So we've been able to complete, you've been able to complete the insight form ahead of time, but there's no other business, there's no other Q&A that I can see at the moment. So Helen, if there's anything else from your side from a housekeeping admin point of view, if not, then I propose that we bring the insight form to a close for today and just finish on Reece's point, which is please register for the future events to continue providing your feedback and input into the development of the technical working group's outputs. Helen, anything else from your side?
Thanks so much, Mark. Nothing else from our side except thank you all so much for joining, and we hope to see you again next quarter.
Perfect. Thank you, Helen. So thanks again to the speakers, to our ENA colleagues for helping facilitate and run the event, and for all of you for joining and taking time out of your diary to process our updates and to contribute to the question and answer sessions. So thank you, everyone. Stay safe, and we'll hope to see you at an insight forum or stakeholder session soon. Thank you and goodbye.